Sir, you're moving to economy. Now.
You might want to look outside first.
Marcus Bell had already buckled into seat 3A when the lead flight attendant stopped beside him and asked to see his boarding pass for the third time. He looked up from the weather map glowing on his phone. At 43, Marcus had learned that certain questions changed shape depending on who was asking them. His dark wool jacket was folded across his lap, his close-cropped hair still damp from the rain outside Charlotte Douglas, and the embossed card in his hand clearly read First 3A. Is there a problem with the seat? The attendant, Denise Harrow, glanced at the pass, then at the white man standing impatiently in the aisle behind her. We've had an equipment adjustment. We need you to relocate to 28C. Marcus waited for the rest of the explanation. None came. He looked past her toward the man, who wore a golf pullover and held a boarding pass that Marcus could not read from where he sat. Was my ticket changed in the system? Denise lowered her voice. Sir, I'm trying to get everyone boarded. We can sort out compensation after departure. Marcus opened the airline app. His reservation still showed 3A. Across the aisle, a woman in a navy pantsuit stopped arranging files in her tote. She had boarded before Marcus and had watched him place his bag overhead. Her name tag from an airport conference read Teresa Nguyen, Operations Counsel. She looked from Marcus's phone to Denise but said nothing. Marcus turned the screen outward. The app still assigns me this seat. If there was an equipment change, who was moved into 3A? The man behind Denise exhaled loudly. I was told they'd handle this. That sentence told Marcus more than Denise's explanation had. Denise shifted her weight. Mr. Bell, we can continue discussing it, but you'll need to move so boarding can continue. Marcus almost smiled at the wording. The delay had existed before he asked a single question, yet somehow the delay now belonged to him. He had spent 12 years teaching his daughter, Nia, that the fastest way to lose control of a bad situation was to accept somebody else's description of it. She was 19 now, finishing her first semester at Howard, and she had texted him that morning before his trip. Don't miss dinner Sunday. I'm actually cooking. He had promised he wouldn't. I'm not refusing to cooperate, Marcus said. I'm asking whether my seat was reassigned. Denise looked toward the forward galley. A younger attendant avoided her eyes and busied himself counting bottled water. Customer service made a decision at the gate. Marcus had spoken with customer service at the gate. They had scanned his pass and welcomed him aboard. The man in the aisle leaned closer to Denise. I have a connection in Dallas. This is getting ridiculous. Marcus noticed the small printed strip attached to the man's boarding pass. Standby upgrade. There it was. He pointed not at the man but at the document. He was upgraded after I boarded. Denise's expression tightened. I'm not discussing another passenger's reservation with you. I didn't ask you to. I'm asking about mine. Lisa finally spoke. His boarding pass still shows 3A. Denise turned toward her. Mom, please let us handle this. Teresa closed her tote. I'm just saying what I can see. For a moment, Denise had a clean exit. She could have checked the manifest, called the gate agent, or admitted there had been a mistake. Instead, she reached for the interphone and asked the purser to come forward. Marcus felt the familiar heat rise behind his ribs. Not rage, fatigue. The kind that came from knowing you had to remain more precise than everyone around you, because one raised voice would suddenly become the most important fact in the room. He unbuckled, but he did not stand. I paid for this seat, he said. My reservation confirms it. Before anyone moves me, I want the reassignment entered into the record with the reason. Denise looked surprised by the request. Through the oval window beside Marcus, rain streaked across the glass as a sleek white business jet rolled slowly along the service taxiway toward the private aviation ramp. Marcus recognized the tail number before the aircraft turned away. He looked at his watch. The jet was early. Denise did not notice it. She was watching the purser approach from the galley, already speaking into his headset. Passenger in 3A is refusing relocation, she said. Marcus heard the sentence clearly. So did Teresa, and this time she reached into her bag for a pen. The purser introduced himself as Grant Ellis and crouched just enough to speak without blocking the aisle. He did not ask Marcus what had happened. Instead, he glanced at Denise, then at the line of passengers back toward the boarding door. Mr. Bell, I understand you've been asked to change seats. I've been told to move to 28C, Marcus said. Nobody has shown me a reissued boarding pass or explained why my confirmed seat was reassigned. Grant held out his hand. May I see your pass? Marcus gave it to him. Grant scanned the printed code with a handheld unit clipped to his belt. The device chirped once. His eyes stayed on the screen for a fraction longer than Marcus expected. Seat 3A was still active under Marcus's name. Behind him, Denise said, "The gate approved the accommodation." Grant's thumb moved across the screen. "I'm not seeing a seat change." And waiting in the aisle, whose bag tag identified him as Robert Kessler, shifted impatiently. "Your gate agent said first class had opened up. I was told this seat was mine." Grant looked at Kessler's pass next. The handheld gave a different tone. "Cleared for 4F. Kessler frowned. "That's not what I was told." Marcus watched Denise. She did not look confused. She looked cornered. The younger attendant near the galley, Evan Price, stopped arranging service trays. "Denise, I thought 4F was the upgrade." She gave him a sharp look. Evan. Lisa's pen paused above a hotel notepad. Marcus could see she had written the time, the flight number, and the phrase refusing relocation in neat block letters. She was not recording a spectacle. She was preserving a sequence. Grant stood. "Nice. Step forward with me." She did not move. "We have a full cabin and a departure slot. Then we should resolve the actual reservation problem." Kessler gave a short laugh. "Are we really doing all this over one seat?" Marcus felt something in him loosen, though not pleasantly. That was the second transformation of the morning. First, his questions had become disruption. Now his confirmed ticket had become an unreasonable attachment to upholstery. "It isn't the seat number," Marcus said. "It's whether your system says I own the right to occupy it." Kessler looked away. Grant asked Marcus to remain where he was while he contacted the gate. That was the first instruction Marcus had received that matched the record in front of them. Aircraft's ventilation hummed above the stalled boarding line. Someone several rows back complained about missing a pushback window. Marcus checked his phone again and saw two messages from Aaron Cole, his flight coordinator. "TailN 722 Mebbite on ramp. Crew ready when you are." Marcus turned the phone face down on his thigh. He had not planned to use the jet that morning. The aircraft belonged to Bell Meridian Aviation, the charter company he had built from a two-plane maintenance operation after Nia's mother died. Marcus still flew commercial whenever schedules allowed because he wanted his company's pilots carrying paying clients, not ferrying him around because he could. Today's private aircraft was in Charlotte for a certification inspection. Aaron had offered him the empty repositioning leg to Dallas. Marcus had declined because his commercial ticket was already booked, and he wanted the quiet time before an afternoon contract review. Now the irony sat a few hundred yards beyond the window. Grant returned from the forward door with a gate supervisor beside him. Her badge read Melanie Cross, first at Grant's scanner, then at Denise. "The system shows Mr. Bell never moved," Melanie said. "Mr. Kessler was cleared into 4F. Denise folded her arms. "There was a service note." "What service note?" Denise hesitated. "A preference request." Melanie checked the tablet in her hand. "There's no authorization to displace a confirmed passenger for a preference request." Marcus heard Teresa's pen move again. Kessler stared at Denise. "You told me he'd been downgraded." For the first time, Denise seemed to realize that the version she had given one passenger could now be compared directly with the version she had given another. Grant asked her to step into the galley. Denise shook her head once. "I was trying to keep a high-value customer from filing another complaint." Melanie's expression changed. "By moving someone who had already boarded? It was supposed to be simple." Marcus looked toward the window. Outside, the white business jet had stopped on the private ramp, its stair door now open beneath the gray morning sky. Inside the cabin, Melanie tapped her tablet and created an incident entry before Marcus could even ask. "Mr. Bell," she said, "you're staying in 3A, and this is being documented." The wrong story had finally hit the system. Now it had a timestamp. Melanie's incident entry should have ended the argument. Instead, it changed Denise's problem from a seating dispute into a record she could no longer control. Grant asked Evan to finish boarding while Melanie remained near 3A. Denise disappeared into the forward galley, with Kessler's unused upgrade slip still in her hand. Marcus watched her fold it once, then slide it beneath a service binder instead of returning it to Grant. Then, he noticed because paperwork had been his first profession long before Bell Meridian owned aircraft. Maintenance shops survived on traceability. A missing signature could ground an engine component worth more than a house. A missing piece of paper in an airline cabin was smaller, but the instinct behind hiding it felt familiar. Mr. Phil, Melanie said, I'm going to need a written statement after arrival. Marcus looked toward the boarding door. After arrival? Yes, you have your seat restored. Can handle the rest in Dallas. That answer was reasonable on its face. Departure slots mattered. A cabin full of uninvolved passengers should not lose an hour because one employee had made a bad decision. Marcus understood that better than most people on the aircraft. He also understood that once an airplane left the gate, loose facts had a habit of becoming cleaner stories. What happens to the original upgrade document, he asked. Melanie glanced toward the galley. That was enough. Lisa noticed it too. She closed her notepad and said, the document Denise was holding? Melanie's mouth tightened. I'll secure it. Marcus unbuckled and stood. Several passengers immediately looked up. He hated that part. A black man rising during an argument inside an airplane could become its own narrative before he took a single step. He kept both hands visible and his voice level. I'm not trying to delay the flight, he said. I'm asking that the document be preserved now. Grant stepped between Marcus and the galley, not aggressively, but decisively. Please stay at your seat. I will when someone confirms the slip has been secured. From behind Grant, Denise appeared. This is exactly what I was concerned about. Marcus stared at her. What were you concerned about? She hesitated. Escalation. The word seemed to satisfy her because it sounded procedural. Marcus felt the first real crack in his control. You moved my seat without authorization, described me as refusing before anyone verified the reservation, and now asking you not to lose the paperwork is escalation? His voice had risen. Not much, but enough. Eva looked at him, and Marcus knew immediately he had given Denise something she could use. Denise reached for the interphone. Grant, I think we need airport security to document his behavior before departure. Grant did not move. Melanie said, nobody is calling security. Denise looked at her. He stood up after being instructed to remain seated. He stood up while the aircraft door is still open, Melanie replied. And we are still boarding. Marcus sat back down before anyone could tell him to. The anger embarrassed him more than he wanted to admit. He thought of Nia correcting him during one of their arguments at home. You don't get to call yourself calm just because everybody else is louder. She had been right then. She would have been right now. Evan approached Grant quietly and held out a folded strip of paper. I took this from under the binder, he said. Denise turned. You had no right to go through my materials. It was a passenger document. Grant unfolded it. The printed slip showed Kessler cleared into 4F at 7:42 a.m. Beneath that, in blue ink, someone had written Move 3A to coach if Ned. No authorization code, no supervisor initials. Melanie photographed the slip with the incident tablet, then placed it inside a transparent document sleeve from her gate folder. Denise stared at Evan as if he had betrayed her. Perhaps he had from her point of view. Grant looked at Marcus. The original is secured, Marcus nodded. Thank you. He should have stopped there. Instead, he picked up his jacket and carry-on. Melanie frowned. Mr. Hill, I'm leaving the flight. You don't have to. I know. That was the part that mattered. Marcus stepped into the jet bridge while the cabin remained silent behind him. Teresa followed only far enough to hand Melanie her business card and offer a witness statement. Evan stayed aboard, suddenly very interested in the beverage cart. At the terminal window, Marcus called Aaron. Bring the car around to signature, he said. Easy. 10 minutes later, the commercial aircraft pushed back without him. As it turned toward the taxiway, Denise looked through the galley window and saw Marcus crossing the private ramp. A ground technician opened the door of the white business jet. Aaron stood at the bottom of the stairs holding a flight folder marked Bell Meridian Aviation. For the first time that morning, Denise understood that Marcus had not stayed in 3A because first class impressed him. He had stayed because it was his. Marcus did not look back at the commercial jet as Aaron closed the cabin door behind him. The Bell Meridian aircraft smelled faintly of leather cleaner and warm avionics, enough that he could identify which maintenance team had prepared it. On the conference table sat the inspection packet he had expected to review in Dallas. Instead of opening it, he dropped into the nearest seat and stared at the unopened message from Nia, asking whether he still planned to make Sunday dinner. Aaron shrugged from. You want me to ask what happened, or do you want 10 minutes before I ask what happened? 10. Good. Because you look like you lost an argument with yourself. Marcus gave him a tired glance. 9 minutes. The dry joke helped more than Marcus wanted it to. As the engines came alive beneath the floor, he replayed the moment he had stood in the aisle. Denise had been wrong before that moment and wrong after it, but Marcus knew anger could complicate a clean complaint. Bell Meridian spent enough time training crews on passenger incidents for him to know how a poorly written report could turn emotion into alleged risk. When the aircraft reached cruising altitude, Aaron opened the flight folder but did not slide it across the table. Melanie Cross called our office. Marcus looked up. How did she know where to call? She didn't. Teresa Nguyen did. That surprised him. Aaron explained that Teresa had searched the name on Marcus's business card after leaving the aircraft information with the gate supervisor. She had discovered Bell Meridian Aviation, then called its public operations line because she was concerned the airline might reduce the incident to a voluntary seat disagreement. She had not posted anything online. She had simply offered her notes and contact information as an independent witness. Marcus rubbed his thumb along the scratched edge of the table latch. I never gave her my card. You didn't. Melanie apparently had your company name from the original booking profile. Marcus frowned. His commercial reservation had been made through Bell Meridian's corporate travel account, but his ownership status was not displayed to cabin staff. That distinction mattered. Denise had not known who he was when she tried to move him, and Marcus wanted it kept that way in any review. I don't want this becoming a story about them mistreating a CEO, he said. Aaron leaned back. Then what is it about? A confirmed passenger was displaced because another customer complained enough times to become expensive. Aaron considered that. And because Denise thought you were easier to move. Marcus did not answer immediately. That was the part he had been avoiding. He could prove the unauthorized reassignment. He could prove the false statement that he had refused relocation before Grant verified anything. He could not prove, from one incident alone, was why Denise had selected him. His phone vibrated. Melanie had emailed a copy of the incident receipt, not a conclusion. The document listed the original 3A assignment, Kessler's authorized upgrade to 4F, Denise's handwritten instruction, and Evan's recovery of the slip. It also noted that Marcus had raised his voice and stood after being asked to remain seated. Marcus read that last line twice. Aaron saw his expression. Accurate? Yes. You hate that? Yes. Still accurate? Marcus looked out at the thin line of clouds below them. Yes. That admission cost him more than defending himself would have. Another message arrived, this time from Bell Meridian's Dallas maintenance director. The private jet certification inspection had uncovered a hydraulic pressure fluctuation that needed Marcus's operational sign-off before the aircraft could return to charter service. His afternoon contract review would have to move. The day was becoming expensive in ways unrelated to Denise. Aaron finally pushed the inspection packet toward him. Hey, this is why you were coming to Dallas. Marcus opened it. For the next 40 minutes, he stopped being the man from seat 3A. He reviewed pressure readings, maintenance intervals, and a technician's handwritten discrepancy note. Work steadied him because numbers did not care how a person looked when they entered a cabin. Then Aaron's phone rang. He listened without speaking, wrote 3 words on the margin of his folder, and slid it across the table. Second complaint. Marcus stared at the note. Aaron lowered the phone. The airline's customer relations team pulled an older report involving Denise, different flight, different passenger. Same kind of seat reassignment. Marcus closed the maintenance packet. The problem had just become larger than what happened to him. By the time Marcus landed in Dallas, the second complaint had become 3. None of them were identical. One involved a business traveler moved from an exit row seat after a frequent flyer objected. Another involved a woman whose upgrade had been reversed after boarding. The third had never mentioned race at all. What connected them was narrower and, in some ways, more troubling. Denise had repeatedly treated certain confirmed passengers as the cheapest variable in a customer service problem. Aaron read the summaries while Marcus signed the hydraulic inspection hold. They've removed her from the return flight pending review. Marcus capped the pen. It's not a finding. No. And I don't want our company calling the airline. Aaron looked at him. We haven't. Keep it that way. The maintenance hangar around them carried the sharp smell of hydraulic fluid and heated rubber. A technician waited beside the open service panel of the jet Marcus had just flown in on. The pressure fluctuation had turned out to be real. Not catastrophic, but enough to keep the aircraft grounded until a replacement valve could be tested. Marcus initialed the hold because that was what authority actually looked like most days. Not dramatic commands, but accepting inconvenience when a procedure required it. His phone rang before he could move to the next page. Melanie Cross. Marcus stepped away from the workbench. "This is Bell, Mr. Ill. Bell, I wanted you to hear this from me before customer relations contacts you. We've opened a formal review of this morning's incident. Denise Harrow has been removed from active duty while we preserve records and interview the crew." Marcus glanced at Aaron. "Preserve which records?" A. The seat control log, upgrade transaction, crew statements, and prior complaints involving similar reassignment decisions. That answer interested him more than the suspension. "Who authorized the review?" "Our regional in-flight director and customer integrity team." Marcus leaned against the edge of the workbench. "And what are they reviewing?" "Denise's conduct or whether your system allows staff to make these changes without a second authorization." There was a pause. "Both now." "Now." Marcus heard the distinction. Melanie continued. "Your incident triggered a comparison against older complaints. We found a manual override category cabin staff have been using to resolve service recovery cases. It was designed for operational disruptions. Some supervisors appear to have treated it as discretionary, so the handwritten note wasn't the whole mechanism. No, it was the instruction. The system override was the mechanism." Marcus thought back to Denise saying customer service had made the decision. At the time, it had sounded like an excuse. Now it looked more like a culture of plausible deniability. Someone could move a passenger, enter a vague server recovery code, and let the system make the downgrade look administrative rather than personal. "Was my reservation actually changed?" asked. "No." Grant stopped the transaction before it was completed. That mattered. The central document proved intent to displace him, but not a completed downgrade. The system log would show whether Denise had begun the override and who, if anyone, had assisted. Marcus appreciated the difference. Melanie said, "There's something else. Denise told investigators that she selected you because your profile showed no elite status, and Mr. Kessler had a history of compensation claims." Marcus closed his eyes briefly. It was the first explanation that sounded almost reasonable. Almost. "Do you have records showing she applied that rule consistently?" "That's what they're checking." Marcus looked across the hangar at two mechanics lowering a protective cover over the grounded jet. One of them called for a torque value. The other repeated it back before touching the fastener. Verification built into motion. "Check passengers who were asked to move," Marcus said. "Not just complaints. Complaints only show who had enough time or confidence to challenge it." Melanie was quiet for a second. "That's a fair point. And don't classify this as a VIP status dispute." "We won't." And Marcus glanced toward the hangar doors, where late afternoon lights stretched across the concrete. "They didn't know I owned an aviation company. That's part of the evidence, not an embarrassment to hide." After the call, Aaron handed him a coffee from the vending alcove. It tasted burnt enough to be useful. "So," Aaron said, "you were right." Marcus shook his head. "I was right about my seat. That's smaller." His phone buzzed again. This time it was Teresa. She had forwarded a photograph of her handwritten notes from the cabin. At the bottom, beneath the timestamps, she had added something Marcus had not heard that morning. Before approaching 3A, Denise had asked Evan, "Which one is less likely to make this expensive?" Marcus read the sentence twice. The system could explain how the seat was nearly taken. That sentence might explain why his was chosen. Marcus did not answer Teresa immediately. He enlarged the photograph until the blue ink blurred into pixels, then reduced it again. Her note was contemporaneous, but it was still a witness's memory written during a tense boarding delay. Useful, yes. Decisive, no. He had spent too many years reviewing maintenance discrepancies to mistake a strong clue for a verified fact. Aaron read the sentence over his shoulder. "That changes things. It changes what we need to test. You think she made it up?" "No." Marcus set the phone beside the inspection packet. "I think if I want somebody disciplined over that sentence, I'd better know exactly what can support it." Aaron folded his arms. "You're protecting Denise now?" Marcus looked at him. I'm protecting the process from becoming as careless as what happened to me. The answer did not satisfy Aaron, and Marcus could tell. They had known each other since Bell Meridian operated from a rented maintenance bay with a roof that leaked over the parts cage. Aaron had backed Marcus through financing failures, overnight repair jobs, and the year after Naya's mother died when Marcus sometimes arrived at work carrying grief like another toolbox. Loyalty made Aaron impatient with restraint. "You always do this," Aaron said. "Someone crosses a line and you start building the defense they might use. 'Cause somebody should. That works in an inspection report. It doesn't always work with people." Marcus almost snapped back. Instead, he picked up the cold coffee and drank it. Aaron was not entirely wrong. Melanie called again 40 minutes later. The airline had preserved the cabin staffing records and the seat control audit trail. Customer Integrity had also located an internal message sent by Denise before boarding began. She had asked the gate desk whether Kessler could be placed in first class because he had complained twice that month and threatened to move his company's travel account. "What did the gate tell her?" Marcus asked. "That 4F was available after the upgrade list cleared, so they gave her a legitimate solution." "Yes," and she still targeted 3A. Melanie exhaled. "That is what the sequence suggests." Marcus walked toward the jet's open service panel while she spoke. A mechanic had laid the removed hydraulic valve on a white absorbent pad, tagging it before replacement. Even a failed component received a chain of custody. Nobody wrote "bad valve" on a sticky note and threw it away. "What does the override log show?" he asked. "Denise entered a service recovery downgrade request against your reservation at 7:46. It never completed because Grant scanned your boarding pass before the transaction was finalized." Marcus stopped walking. That was stronger than the handwritten slip. It placed Denise inside the system, attempting the exact change she later described as something customer service had already decided. Melanie continued. "There's another field in the request." "What field?" "Reason code." She selected voluntary accommodation. Marcus let the words sit. He had never volunteered. "Can cabin staff enter that without passenger confirmation?" "They can initiate it. They're supposed to document consent before completion." There was the deeper problem. The software had not discriminated against Marcus. A person had made the choice, but the software had given that person a convenient label that could have turned coercion into consent if Grant had not interrupted the process. Aaron watched Marcus end the call. "Still think it's smaller than the seat?" And Marcus slipped his phone into his pocket. "I think the seat is how we found it." He asked Aaron to postpone the afternoon contract review and arrange a secure video room at Bell Meridian's Dallas office. Not for lawyers. Not yet. Marcus wanted Teresa, Grant, Evan, and the airline's customer integrity reviewer to compare what each person had actually seen against the timestamps before anybody turned the incident into a public narrative. Aaron frowned. "That could cost us the Westbridge meeting." "I know. We've been waiting 3 months." "I know." It was not a painless choice. Westbridge represented a new charter management contract Marcus had pursued since spring, and delaying their review might send them to a competitor. But he was no longer interested in an apology from Denise or a complimentary flight credit. He wanted the airline to remove the voluntary accommodation code from any involuntary seat change unless the passenger personally confirmed it. At 4:20, Melanie sent the final item for the review. It was not another complaint. It was an 18-month report showing every first-class downgrade initiated through that code, matched against who had actually confirmed consent. Marcus opened the file, saw the first page of numbers, and called Aaron back into the room. "Get the screen ready." The pattern was about to be tested. The secure conference room at Bell Meridian had no windows and too much fluorescent light. Marcus preferred it that way. There would be no dramatic backdrop. No aircraft visible through glass, no reason for anyone to confuse his company with the substance of the review. On the wall screen sat an 8-month spreadsheet of first-class downgrades initiated under the airline's voluntary accommodation code. Melanie joined from Charlotte with a customer integrity analyst named Priya Shah. Teresa appeared from an airport lounge in Dallas. Grant and Evan connected separately from crew rooms because the airline had instructed witnesses not to discuss statements with one another before the review. Denise was not invited. Her interview would be handled independently, which Marcus considered necessary if any finding was supposed to survive an appeal. Priya shared the first summary. 143 downgrade requests had been initiated through the code. Most were legitimate, involving passengers who accepted vouchers, travel credits, or alternate seating after documented conversations. 27 lacked any stored consent confirmation. Of those, 9 had generated complaints afterward. Marcus leaned forward. And what makes mine different from those 9? We don't know yet, Priya said. That's why we're separating system weakness from individual conduct. Aaron, sitting 2 chairs away, tapped a pencil against his notebook but kept quiet. Marcus appreciated the discipline. A day earlier, Aaron had wanted the numbers to convict someone. Now he was listening to what they could and could not establish. Priya pulled up Marcus' transaction. At 7:46 a.m., Denise had initiated the downgrade request. At 7:47, the reason field was marked voluntary accommodation. At 7:48, Grant scanned Marcus's boarding pass at 3A, which triggered a conflict alert because the passenger remained physically verified in the seat being reassigned. The incomplete request automatically froze. Grant nodded from his screen. That's when I realized his assignment had never changed. Melanie asked Evan to describe what happened before Grant arrived. Evan hesitated. Denise told me Kessler was a priority recovery. She said we could move somebody without status if coach had space. Did she say Marcus specifically? Priya asked. Not at first. Evan rubbed the back of his neck. She looked at 3 profiles on the handheld. Then she picked 3A. Marcus kept his eyes on the screen. Do you remember why? Evan glanced away. She said he was traveling alone and didn't have loyalty status. Then she said something like he looked less likely to turn it into a claim. Teresa raised her hand slightly before speaking. That's close to what I heard, but not identical. Priya nodded. Tell us your version. Teresa read directly from her notes. I wrote, which one is less likely to make this expensive? I can't swear whether Denise said it before or after looking at Mr. Bell. That distinction mattered. He felt Aaron turn toward him, perhaps expecting frustration. Instead, Marcus wrote the sentence down. Teresa's testimony supported an economic calculation. It did not, by itself, establish racial motive. Then Priya opened a second table. The 27 no-consent downgrades had been sorted by travel profile. Passengers without elite status were selected far more often than frequent flyers. Solo travelers were selected more often than pairs. Those patterns matched Denise's explanation about minimizing compensation risk. But another column had been added after Melanie requested demographic review from customer records that lawfully contained self-identified information. Priya did not dramatize the result. Black passengers represented approximately 16% of eligible first-class travelers in this sample, she said. They represented 37% of the no-consent downgrade attempts. Nobody spoke for several seconds. Marcus studied the denominator first. Small samples could mislead. Is that airline-wide? No. Only the flights connected to this operational group. Then don't call it an airline pattern. Priya nodded. Agreed. Aaron finally stopped tapping the pencil. The numbers did not prove Denise had looked at Marcus and consciously decided his race made him expendable. They showed something more difficult. A discretionary practice built around who seemed least costly to inconvenience had produced an unequal result, and nobody had been checking. Marcus asked Priya to run one more comparison. Show completed downgrades against aborted ones. I want to know whether people who challenged the move disappeared from the statistics because the transaction never finished. Priya paused. That will take a different query. Can you do it? Yes. Melanie looked at Marcus. What outcome are you asking for now? Marcus glanced at the maintenance report beside him. Bell Meridian's grounded jet was still waiting on a replacement valve across the field. Inconvenient but exactly where it belonged until the defect was understood. Disable that reason code for cabin-initiated downgrades until consent can be verified, he said. Not because of me, because your system currently allows pressure to be recorded as agreement. Priya began typing. This time, the test would not ask whether Denise had broken one rule. It would ask whether the rule itself had been helping people hide the break. The next morning, Priya reran the data with aborted transactions included. Marcus was halfway through a maintenance walk-around when Melanie called, so he answered beside Bell Meridian's grounded jet with a flashlight still in his hand. The replacement hydraulic valve had arrived overnight. 2 technicians were preparing a pressure test, calling out readings to each other before recording them. Priya's voice came through his headset. You were right about the missing cases. Completed downgrades had made the problem look smaller. Once aborted attempts were counted, 41 passengers had been targeted through the voluntary accommodation code without documented consent. 14 had challenged the move strongly enough that the transaction stopped before completion. Those passengers had never appeared in the airline's normal downgrade report because technically they had kept their seats. So the dashboard rewarded failure to finish the improper transaction, Marcus said. Priya corrected him gently. It didn't reward it. It failed to measure it. Marcus appreciated the distinction. Fair. At 10, the airline convened an operational review. Marcus joined only as the affected passenger, not as an aviation executive advising another company. Regional In-Flight Director Celeste Ward chaired the meeting with legal counsel, customer integrity, crew standards, and the manager responsible for the service recovery program. Denise participated from a separate room with a union representative. Her face appeared on one corner of the screen, tired and guarded rather than frightened. Celeste began with the system log. Miss Harrow, did Mr. Bell agree to move to economy before you selected voluntary accommodation? No, Denise said. Her representative shifted beside her. Celeste continued. Why did you select that reason? Denise rubbed her thumb over the edge of a paper cup. Because I expected him to agree once compensation was explained. We do that sometimes to keep boarding moving. Who taught you to do that? Denise hesitated. Nobody formally. Priya displayed a set of supervisor messages recovered from the operational group. None instructed employees to falsify consent. Several, however, praised crews for solving high-cost complaints before departure and reducing post-flight compensation. One manager had written, "Keep the expensive customers from becoming cases." Another message encouraged staff to use judgment when choosing whom to relocate. Marcus understood immediately why the review mattered more than one ugly morning. Denise had made the decision. The culture had supplied the incentive and enough ambiguity to make the shortcut feel useful. It asked about Marcus specifically. Denise looked directly into her camera. I saw a solo traveler without status. Mr. Kessler had already complained multiple times. Looked like the lower-risk option. And his race? Denise's eyes dropped. I didn't choose him because he was black. Marcus believed she might even believe that answer. Brought up the disparity table. We cannot establish conscious racial intent from the available evidence. We can establish that the discretion used by this group produced substantially different outcomes for black passengers in the reviewed sample. Denise stared at the figures. I never saw those numbers. You weren't expected to, Celeste said. Management was. That was the first moment Marcus felt the review move beyond finding someone to blame. Celeste turned to him. Mr. Bell, what remedy are you requesting? Marcus had prepared 3 points and deleted 6 others before the meeting. First, cabin staff should not be able to mark a passenger as voluntarily accommodating without affirmative confirmation. Second, aborted downgrade attempts need to remain visible in reporting. Third, any discretionary displacement should require a second employee to verify the reason before the seat changes. No demand for Denise's firing, no settlement number, no speech about respect. Celeste asked, and personally, Marcus looked at the handwritten note displayed beside the transaction log. Correct the incident record. It says I became confrontational during a seating dispute. I wanted to say the dispute began with an unauthorized attempt to reassign my confirmed seat and that I raised my voice later while requesting preservation of the document. Denise finally looked at him. You're admitting that part? It happened. Her expression changed in a way Marcus could not read. Celeste called a recess while counsel reviewed the remedies. Marcus returned to the hangar floor. One technician increased hydraulic pressure while the other watched the gauge. Then, the needle held steady this time. 23 minutes later, Celeste called back. The voluntary accommodation function had been disabled for crew-initiated downgrades effective immediately. A 2-person verification requirement would replace it during a 30-day system review. Aborted transactions would be retained for audit, and the operational group's prior cases would undergo independent examination. Denise would remain removed from duty pending the completed conduct investigation. Her managers would be reviewed separately. Marcus listened without satisfaction or disappointment. The decision was provisional, but the mechanism that had nearly rewritten his refusal as consent was already gone. Then Celeste added one final finding. The manager who had created the group's compensation reduction targets had been aware of the demographic disparity for 6 months and had chosen not to escalate it. The manager's name was Howard Vale, Director of Service Recovery for the Charlotte Operating Group. 6 months earlier, an internal analyst had flagged a disparity in discretionary seat changes and asked whether the pattern required review. Vale had answered that the sample was too small to justify disrupting a program that had reduced compensation claims. Now Celeste Ward read that exchange into the record, while Marcus stood beside the hydraulic test cart in Belle Meridian's hangar. The finding did not excuse Denise. She had still selected Marcus, entered a false consent code, and described his resistance as a behavioral problem before anyone verified the seat assignment. But it changed the shape of responsibility. Denise had used discretion badly inside a system whose managers measured savings without measuring who absorbed them. Celeste informed Marcus that Vale had been placed on administrative leave and that the airline's ethics office would review whether he had deliberately suppressed a compliance concern. Marcus thanked her, then asked about Evan. Celeste seemed surprised. "Mr. Price?" He recovered the upgrade slip after Denise hid it. "What happens to him?" There was a pause while someone off-camera checked a note. Evan had been removed from the return pairing with Denise, not disciplined, but he had expressed concern that speaking during the review would damage future assignments. Marcus felt his stomach tighten. A company could praise witnesses publicly while punishing them quietly through schedules, recommendations, and desirable routes. "I want that addressed before you announce anything," Marcus said. Celeste nodded. "We can place his scheduling under independent review for 90 days and prohibit retaliatory changes without crew standards approval. Put it in writing." By afternoon, the airline had also corrected Marcus's incident record. The revised entry preserved the fact that he had stood and raised his voice, but it placed those actions after the unauthorized downgrade attempt and his request to preserve the paper instruction. Marcus read the new version twice before approving the acknowledgement. Accuracy did not require making himself flawless. It required keeping cause and effect in the proper order. Denise requested permission to speak with him through her union representative. Marcus nearly declined. Aaron, sitting across from him with 2 vending machine sandwiches between them, said nothing until Marcus pushed one sandwich away untouched. "You don't owe her a conversation," Aaron said. "I know." "Don't have to prove you're fair." Marcus looked at him. "I know that too." He accepted a 10-minute call. Denise appeared without uniform makeup or the polished cabin voice Marcus remembered. She did not ask him to forgive her. "I kept telling myself I was solving the bigger problem," she said. "Kessler complained every time something went wrong. Moving you seemed easier." Marcus let the silence remain. She swallowed. "I didn't think about what easier meant. That's the part you should think about." Denise nodded. "I saw the numbers today." Marcus resisted the temptation to turn that into a lesson for her. "The numbers aren't my job to interpret for you." "No." She looked down. "I know." The call ended without reconciliation. 2 days later, the airline announced the first operational repairs internally. The voluntary accommodation code was replaced with passenger-confirmed consent. Any involuntary downgrade required a documented reason and second-person verification. Aborted attempts would remain visible in monthly audits, and the Charlotte Group's prior 18 months of transactions would be independently reviewed. Evan received written anti-retaliation protection and was temporarily reassigned under a different supervisor at his own request. Belle Meridian's jet passed its hydraulic pressure test that same morning. Marcus watched the technicians remove the red maintenance tag only after the final reading held within limits. Aaron stood beside him, arms folded. "Westbridge called," he said. Marcus braced himself. "They walking?" "No, they want to reschedule." Marcus looked at him. Aaron shrugged. "Apparently delaying a meeting because you refused to rush a safety sign-off did not scare an aviation client." Marcus laughed once, mostly at himself. That evening he finally booked his flight home, commercial again. At the airport his new boarding pass showed first class. Marcus folded it once and slipped it into his jacket without checking the seat number twice. The system had changed. Now the question was whether the change would survive after everyone stopped watching. 3 weeks later, Marcus received the airline's independent review before sunrise. While he was standing in his kitchen trying to rescue a pan of eggs Nia had declared beyond repair. She had come home from Howard for the weekend, taken one look at the skillet, and pushed him aside with the authority of someone who had survived a semester on dining hall food. "You own airplanes and still can't make breakfast," she said. "I employ people who understand their specialties. That is an incredible excuse." Marcus smiled and handed her the spatula. His phone vibrated on the counter, but he finished pouring coffee before opening the report. For once, he did not want an investigation deciding the rhythm of his morning. The findings were more complicated than a clean victory. Denise had violated seat assignment procedures, falsely entered anticipated consent as actual voluntary accommodation, and inaccurately described Marcus as refusing a valid relocation. Investigators found insufficient evidence to conclude that she had consciously selected him because he was black. They did find that the Charlotte Group's discretionary practices had produced a significant racial disparity that management had failed to examine after being warned. Howard Vail was terminated after the ethics review concluded that he had withheld the analyst's concern from compliance and continued using compensation reduction targets that encouraged employees to shift inconvenience toward passengers considered less financially risky. The 2 supervisors received formal discipline and retraining. Denise was offered reinstatement after a suspension, but only in a non-lead cabin position subject to additional evaluation. Yours read that section twice. Nia slid eggs onto 2 plates. "You wanted her fired? I don't know. That sounds like no." And, "It sounds like I thought I knew what accountability should look like before I saw all of it." Nia sat across from him. "Did she get to pretend nothing happened?" "No." "Then maybe you don't have to pick the punishment." Marcus looked at his daughter and wondered when she had become old enough to hand his own arguments back to him. The airline's operational changes were easier to measure. In the first month after disabling the old consent code, every voluntary downgrade required confirmation through the passenger's mobile app or assigned airport form. Involuntary moves triggered supervisor review automatically. Aborted attempts remained in the audit pool. The carrier also separated customer retention targets from seat control decisions, preventing staff from being rewarded for avoiding compensation claims through unverified reassignment. Most important to Marcus, the first audit under the new system contained the cases that did not become complaints. Evan emailed him afterward. His schedule had remained intact, and crew standards had approved his transfer request to a base closer to his family. He admitted that he had almost stayed silent when Denise tucked the upgrade slip under the binder. "I kept thinking it wasn't my fight," he wrote. "Then she said you were causing the problem, and I knew that wasn't what I had watched happen." Marcus replied with 4 words, "You kept the record straight." Teresa declined the airline's offer of travel credit and asked instead that her witness statement remain attached to the review file. She told Marcus she had spent most of her career advising companies to preserve documents during disputes, yet on the flight she had nearly convinced herself that writing down what happened would be intrusive. Her discomfort had lasted perhaps 30 seconds. Evans had lasted longer. Both had mattered. Denise sent no apology. Months earlier, Mark might have considered that unfinished. Now he found he preferred the absence of a polished statement written for her by someone else. The corrective action existed whether she supplied the right words or not. At Bell Meridian, Westbridge signed the delayed charter management agreement after completing its own operational review. Marcus celebrated by taking Nia to the neighborhood barbecue place she loved, rather than the expensive restaurant Aaron suggested. Halfway through dinner, she reminded him that he had promised to stop checking work messages at the table. He placed the phone face down. "You're enjoying this," he said. "A little." Outside, a commercial jet crossed low over the city, its landing lights moving between buildings. Marcus watched it for only a moment before returning to his plate. The dispute over seat 3A was nearly 6 weeks behind him now. His ticket had been corrected, the false incident narrative amended, the witnesses protected, and the system that could turn pressure into recorded consent had been rebuilt. A final audit was still due at the end of the quarter. This time, Marcus was less interested in who would be punished than in whether the numbers would prove the repair was holding. The quarter-end audit arrived on a Sunday afternoon, while Marcus and Naya were replacing a loose hinge on one of the kitchen cabinets. He almost left the email unopened until Monday. Then Naya, holding the cabinet door steady with both hands, said, "If you're going to stare at your phone like that, at least admit you want to read it." Marcus laughed, tightened the last screw, and waited until the door swung cleanly before opening the report. The numbers were clear. Under the new confirmation system, involuntary first-class reassignments had fallen sharply, and every completed voluntary downgrade in the Charlotte group now carried recorded passenger consent. More important, racial disparity that had appeared in the previous sample had narrowed to a level the independent reviewers considered statistically inconclusive. The report did not claim the problem had been permanently solved. It said the mechanism that had allowed undocumented discretion was no longer operating the same way. Marcus read the methodology before the conclusion. Aborted transactions were now counted. Passenger challenges were not removed from the data merely because an employee backed away before completing the change. Supervisors had to review every discretionary displacement within 24 hours, and customer retention staff no longer influenced seat assignments during boarding. It was the kind of repair Marcus trusted because it could be measured again later. Celeste Ward called the following morning. The airline had adopted the changes across all domestic operating groups rather than limiting them to Charlotte. Denise had completed retraining and returned as a regular cabin attendant without supervisory responsibilities. Her performance would be reviewed after 6 months. Howard Vale's termination had survived his internal appeal, not because investigators proved he had ordered discriminatory treatment, because he had knowingly suppressed a compliance warning and maintained incentives after being told they were producing unequal outcomes. "And the original incident?" Marcus asked. "Closed," Celeste said. "Your record remains corrected. The review findings are attached permanently to the case. No behavioral restriction or passenger notation remains on your profile." Marcus leaned back in his office chair. That sentence mattered more than any voucher the airline had offered. The false version of the morning no longer followed him through a database he could not see. Evan had received a commendation from crew standards for preserving the upgrade slip and cooperating with the review. Teresa's notes remained part of the final investigative file. Neither became famous. No viral clip turned them into symbols. They simply returned to their jobs with the knowledge that 30 seconds of attention, one recovered piece of paper, and the willingness to contradict a convenient story had changed what investigators were able to prove. Marcus never spoke with Denise again. He decided he did not need to. Her discipline was documented, her authority reduced, and the system around her altered. Whether she privately understood every consequence belonged to her, not to him. Justice, Marcus had learned, became distorted when it demanded access to another person's conscience as proof that anything had changed. 2 weeks later, Bell Meridian accepted delivery of the same jet whose hydraulic valve had delayed Marcus in Dallas. The repaired aircraft sat on the ramp in morning light while technicians completed the release checklist. Aaron handed Marcus the logbook and pointed toward the cabin. "Your ride to Chicago. Unless you've decided first class builds character." He smiled. "I'm taking the jet. Growth. No scheduling." Aaron laughed and walked back toward the hangar. Before boarding, Marcus called Naya. She answered from campus and immediately reminded him about Sunday dinner. He promised to be home, then stopped before adding the usual qualification about weather, clients, or maintenance. "I'll be there," he said instead. The aircraft door was still open when an email from Celeste appeared on his phone. The airline's board had approved the new seat control standard permanently. Attached beneath the announcement was a separate request. Customer Integrity wanted Marcus to serve on a temporary advisory panel reviewing how other automated service decisions recorded passenger consent. It was not another seat dispute. It was a larger question about where convenience could still be mistaken for permission. Marcus looked from the message to the flight folder waiting inside the cabin. Then he forwarded the request to Aaron with one line. "Put 30 minutes on my calendar." He climbed the stairs, and this time the private jet outside was not the proof of who he was. It was simply the plane taking him where he had chosen to go.